historically your digital banking solution is going to connect straight into your core. Your account opening system is going to connect straight into your core. Maybe your CRM straight to core. And there are all these vendors are connecting in their own way. And it's fine, it works. But what we've done is at each of those integration points, we've built out the integration and we own it. And what that has also allowed us to do is orchestrate those experiences across the platforms.
Maryland-based Sandy Spring Bank recently announced its pending acquisition by Atlantic Union Bancorp. This came in the midst of a 4-year effort of wide-ranging digital transformation at the 156-year-old bank. Spurred by the challenges of 2020, the team at Sandy Spring set out not just to refresh the look and feel of their digital channels, but to design and craft a complete and modern end-to-end experience their customers expect. To dig into that process, we're talking today with Chief Digital Officer Chris Orr and Director of Omni-Channel Strategy Jeff Weidley about the scope of the effort and the unusual organization and partnership they levered to pull it off. Chris and Jeff, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think it's worth talking about the more recent history of the bank. I know you're well over a 150-year-old institution that goes all the way back to damn near the Civil War. But your more recent history and some of the things that you've done to really kind of transform the direction of the bank, particularly the digital capabilities of the bank. Tell us a little bit about that, what the impetus was, where you got started, how you started to think about that strategy.
Yeah, I can jump off, Chris, and then you can fill in. So our executive team had for a long time wanted to modernize the bank, our ability to work with customers and have better capabilities for our employees. So always looking for the right entry point for those, strategies and vision. And for us, it was really on the tail end of the pandemic and the Paycheck Protection Program efforts that, us and every other bank in the country went through. And, that was really the impetus to see that our customers were willing to and wanted to work with us in different ways because we had to use different channels, different technologies that we hadn't really used before. And that started off, an initiative in the bank where Chris and I were asked to join together as the business and technology partnership to put together a vision and a roadmap and, for how we were going to take the bank forward.
So was the pain point there your ability, your meaning, was it more about looking inside for how you performed during that challenge, or was it more driven by your customers saying, we didn't get enough, it was too hard, right? You weren't flexible enough. Like what itch were you scratching around that?
I think it was a bit of both, but I would say internal started to drive it for me. Starting in kind of a consulting world and a software development world, it became apparent to me working in a community bank that we're always heavily reliant on vendors, and specifically ones that may solve one or two issues. And, Jeff in the past had come to me with a problem he wanted to solve for a client issue or an internal problem that was really hard for us to solve. And so we started this kind of talking about how we could modernize the bank a bit, leveraging platforms, bringing software engineering capabilities to a small community bank. And how do we tie that to the business strategy and not just be, a tech strategy driving something within the institution. I think, knowing as a bank that we needed to continue to grow and stay competitive, we need to be able to respond to client and business needs a lot faster than we could historically.
So a lot of that gets down to, sometimes there's a strategy of like stuff in a box, buy a bunch of point products, and it solves the problems, but the continuity of the experience, particularly from either an individual customer or across all of your customers, particularly if you have consumers plus, business customers, and they're both, and they see both sides of that business. And when it's inconsistent, like that causes problems. So was it really more about like filling in those gaps, making the kind of continuity aspect of it? And I'm not talking like colors and branding, but really like that experience of this is what it's like to do business with Sandy Spring. Was that more the angle?
You go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say, yeah, I think you know, about a word, a common word people use in the industry, obviously, is omni-channel, and it's really hard to do that when everything's different, right? Maybe your account opening system in the branch is different than your account opening system online. Your account opening system for a business client is different than your account opening system for a consumer client, which, like you articulated, are often the same person just coming in from for a different reason. Or if you want to do some servicing action, so I'm going to change my demographic information in digital banking, that's a different process than if I go into the branch and have to change where I call the call center. And so it really was about making sure we put platforms in place that allow us to ultimately put together consistent experiences across all those channels.
So who drove the requirements from this? I mean, where were you trying to say, like, this is how we really understand the problem that we're solving, and this is the person who's going to tell us if we solved it or not, right? Was that inside, outside? Like, where did that really come from?
So it really was the partnership with me and Chris, business and technology, with the direction of our executive team. But we started out with some simple premises around improving the experience, adding the consistency, and being able to take a longer view into the future with problems that we wanted to solve, which is a lot of what the platform strategy let us go after. But the business needs always drove the high level strategy, which drove into what the major requirements were, and always had a large influence in the prioritization of things. So as we started to take down different things on our roadmap, there were obviously a lot of things that we could improve on. There were some things that were technology things, some things that were operational things, some things that were sales or service things. But we really kind of put the client needs in the highest priority bucket, and then worked from there to build that omni-channel experience where the employee could interact with the client however the client wanted to interact with us. And then we let everything sort of drive off of that.
So a lot of this was this vision of the future and a roadmap of where you're going to go and these like specific milestones you're going to meet. So who was in the room to really put that plan together? Like, how did you organize, or who did you include to both to make sure you got the right thing on the paper, but then also for the buy-in and the execution later?
Yeah. So, it started, like Jeff has kind of articulated, started top of the house, from straight from the board and the CEO right down to, they went to our chief banking officer and our chief information officer. That's the business and tech driving. And then when they brought Jeff and I in, part of what we were tasked to do was drive alignment, right? And alignment can't happen with two people. You need leaders from across the bank. So we had, representation from operations, representation from marketing, the branches, commercial sales, and Jeff and I's job was not necessarily to dictate what we're doing with that roadmap, like you said, but really to bring everyone's vision together and make a cohesive recommendation. Obviously, you're going to have disagreements in there. Not everyone's always going to agree, and which is why the kind of two in a box structure worked, because ultimately we had to try and make recommendations for what we thought was best for the institution, taking all that in. But we really tried to drive alignment across each of the business lines and make sure everyone had a voice. And I would say, even as we've moved into an operational state where we're now, a lot of these systems are live and we're doing continuous development, pushing out monthly releases. We've set up structures in which, we have product owners that are working with business line leaders to really drive our roadmaps going forward as well.
So how big are we talking about from an organizational side? Number of people involved, budget. I mean, roughly, what are you kind of talking about? Because you're like about 4 years into this at this point, from a transformation standpoint.
Yeah. Go ahead, Chris.
No, you go, Joe.
Yeah. So, I mean, it started small. As Chris mentioned, it came down from the CEO to our executive team. And then, we started putting together a team of, cross-functional people across the bank. So I think initially, at the very outset, when we were building out the strategy, it might have been a handful of us, half a dozen to a dozen people, sort of coming together and contributing to that effort. And then as we started to work that vision through our executive team for approval, and then push it out into our business and get feedback from business lines and operational units, we really started to expand those teams to include people. And I don't know the exact number of people, but many dozens of people, maybe 100 people or more could have been at any given point, especially when we were getting into testing and things like that. From a budget side, early on, we made some rough projections, which were ultimately good for us. But, I would say definitely in the 2 comma club. So,
Mhm.
not inexpensive.
And just size of the institution, you guys during this time period about 13, 14 billion in assets, right?
Yes,
And
that's right.
how many I know some 50 something branches, and how many employees roughly?
About 1,200.
1,200 employees. Okay. So not not an insignificant amount. You're looking at maybe 10% of the bank's employee base touching this thing at some point. I'm sure a much higher percentage of folks that headquarters that aren't involved in branch operations and field work. So this seems like this was a pretty big bet for the bank. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, for
Sure.
sure. And I would say, just to clarify, I wouldn't call it necessarily a corporate driven initiative. We had quite a bit of field and client facing representation, and in fact, as we started to stand up capabilities, one of the things we did early on was install client feedback listening posts, both internally and externally, so that we could get feedback and iterate, which actually drove quite a bit of our initial roadmap prioritization. As customers told us they wanted certain things, we were able to deliver that and push those up in the priority list.
So what's kind of the scope of where you went with this? What were some of the things that you touched? There's a lot of moving parts, in an institution of that size. What was fair game? What wasn't fair game? What did you ultimately end up really materially changing about operations and IT and everything else, right?
Yeah. Um,
So,
Go ahead, Jeff.
yeah, if you want, I'll just sort of lay out the pillars, and then Chris can give some of the detail. But when we built the vision, we had certain pillars of capabilities and functionality that we wanted to attack, and that's how we sort of set up our roadmaps. And so they were the digital experience, which you can think of as things like online and mobile banking. They were the digital storefront. So how were we going to sell and service, our products? MarTech, assisted sales and service. How are we going to deliver bankers to clients when and where they wanted them? Data and API services.
So almost everything except your core, it sounds like.
Pretty much.
Okay.
Although I would say the focus early on was much been more on the consumer bank because it's a bit simpler than the commercial bank, obviously, and everything you do in consumer translates and then some. And so the idea was to start there, learn, iterate, and continue to move into more of the treasury management commercial function. So I would say our roadmap's much further along on the consumer bank side. And that's kind of what the path has been for us. So, when we started with account opening, we're starting with some simple consumer products before we eventually got to every consumer product and maybe some small business type things, but eventually want to scale into the more complex items. But we were trying to, really be focused on getting things out and, to like Jeff's point, get feedback, improve the process as we went up the complexity chain as well.
So what's an example of one of these pillars or a project, just to give a sense of kind of what was involved, the scope of it, how you manage change, that aspect of it.
Chris, do you want to talk about the digital experience and the platform we use there?
Sure. So the biggest one was our consumer online banking transformations. We partnered with Backbase on, and one of the reasons they kind of fit for us was because of the ability to put a development team around and take kind of features they maybe built out of the box, but then build things that we wanted to do as a bank and start to streamline some of those experiences we talked about earlier. Moving digital banking is a big initiative. Obviously, has a lot of client impact. And for us, it was about 50,000 users that we had to convert. One of the difficult things with digital banking as well, I think, is that maybe with account opening, you can do an easy MVP. Okay, we're going to put 2 products on digital to do account opening, and we'll start to add 3, 4, 5, 6 down the line. When you already have a platform like digital mobile banking, and you have a feature set that clients are used to having, you have to be really careful about at least meeting that feature set that you have, and then being focused on what things you want to put in place that are net new ads that give the clients a reason why they went through a conversion. Because no matter how well you do, it's still a conversion, right? They have to re-enroll and download new apps and things like that. Um, but the unique thing for us as a community bank of our size that I don't think many people do is we actually have now a consumer banking platform where we have a development team and we do monthly releases. I think that's fairly unique, and it allows us to, I remember a month after we went live, it was something small a client called and complained about, and we kind of wanted to show and demonstrate how we were different now. And I think within 2 weeks we solved whatever that client complaint was. It might have been adding a field to something they downloaded, something simple, but the capability of being able to respond to that quickly I think is very unique for a bank of our size.
Actually,
sorry, go ahead, Chris. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I wanted just to add on because that was a really good example of the business technology partnership and how it benefits both ways. So just the concept of minimum viable product was not something on the business side that we had really thought about, talked about, done anything with strategically. And so just the concept of having to critically think about that, how we could get to market, drive value early, and then continue to iterate was something that not only impacted this project work, but other sort of tangential projects and even non-related projects that we started to do afterwards. We started to think about it from that aspect. So just another good example of sort of blending these disciplines together.
So, but let's go back to this idea of really bringing some of that development, particularly around the customer experience aspect of it, bringing that in-house and doing that effectively yourself, building your own products. Was that brand new? Was there any semblance of that before? Because, typically institutions of your size, at least from a historical standpoint, were operators. They were there to make sure that the infrastructure worked correctly, but anything that got into like bug fix was going to involve a vendor, either the product owner or somebody who's doing support from you from a systems integration standpoint. And so like the core competence from the institution standpoint was vendor management.
That's right.
And it sounds like you've stepped out of that, and that's a new role. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's certainly not easy, but we were doing a little bit of light software development. When I say that, maybe on our CRM system or something like that, doing some light customizations for the back office, but nothing very extreme. And so when we set out to do all this was kind of one of the key underpinnings of it was the whole control thing, like I talked about. And so I just mentioned about the digital experience, but the other big piece of this, and actually where I think banks can dip their toes in a little bit, the easiest way is integration and API development. And what that has also allowed us to do is orchestrate those experiences across the platforms. Historically, your digital banking solution is going to connect straight into your core. Your account opening system is going to connect straight into your core. Maybe your CRM straight to core. And there are all these vendors are connecting in their own way, and it's fine. It works, and it's in that from that regard. But what we've done is at each of those integration points, we've built out the integration and we own it. And what that allows us to do is orchestrate the experiences. So like, for example, maybe when a customer changes their address in digital banking, I also want to put a record of that in the CRM system so that if they call into the call center, someone knows that client has changed their information. And so I think that was really important. But the other piece of this that's very different, I think, to come back to your question, is also the change management function of it. Historically, people who have been in the bank for a long time don't really understand what those capabilities can bring to them. And so what we've also tried to do is find nice, easy use cases that show the power of software development in the institution. And what you started to see is people in the operational functions or sales functions in the bank even start to think differently about how we can solve their problems. And I think that's been really cool as well.
So there's a lot of skill involved in developing a capability like that. It's not just hire developers, right? It's architecture, it's obviously the development, it's QA, it's security, all the elements that soup to nuts. How did you go about either developing that inside or acquiring or really kind of going from we don't do this thing to this is a really important thing that we do from a customer experience standpoint?
Yeah, it's a good question. So what we did was we started, obviously we had some consultants that came in to help us kind of stand the practice up, even bring in some of the skill sets, the development skill sets needed. Maybe they had some background in some of the systems and platforms we're leveraging. And while we were doing that, it really was coming top down and starting to hire the leaders that we needed to help build those practices out. And then those leaders bringing in the talent. And so what we had was like a curve in the beginning where there's a lot of consultants helping us do this, and we start to hire and you start to kind of move off of it. And that was kind of the balance for us, was leveraging outside help, then bringing in the right talent, the right leadership who had experience doing these things, and then bringing in, the software development skill set under that. And that's taken us every part of the 3 to 4 years to do. But we've gotten to that point now, which is pretty exciting.
So I know you're not at the end of this, but in the process, and particularly as you were going through different projects, how did you at least internally measure success, and I guess to a broader extent, kind of prove that this made sense to your leadership, to your board, to the executives, that this was something that can kind of continue to do?
Yeah. So what we do is we actually monthly measure KPIs across all of these platforms, and that's something that was started early in the development cycle. So how customers are accessing these platforms, what features they're using, what things that had been automated in the back office, that used to be man hours that are now just point and clicks. And so we definitely see quite a bit of improvement in those KPIs, and that's something that's been confirming the efficacy of the program. And one thing I would say, certainly on the sales side, is just about everything that we've put in from a client-facing perspective, they use and adopt very quickly. We put in a P2P solution, and that blew away our old P2P solution by miles. We put in an account opening platform, and all of a sudden we were opening several X of accounts that we were opening in the previous platform. We put in a fraud and KYC program and platform, and that really significantly reduced our incidents in the digital channel, and actually made it really comparable with other channels we had. So there was just a lot of confirming information coming back, in addition to net promoter scores and client feedback, that we put those listening systems in all of those platforms to hear the honest client feedback. And that gave us an opportunity to reach out to people directly where we needed to, and also to just basically understand the general sentiment of how people felt about what we were delivering.
Did you have a North Star metric, or one that was, the thing you put in bold in 20-point font at the top of the dashboard that everybody was interested in? Or was it more, it's many things, and so we're going to weave a narrative together around it?
Yeah, I think the latter. As we mentioned earlier, there were quite a few pillars, and those, while they're all sort of interconnected in how a customer or an employee flows through a journey within the bank, they all have their different needs and measures. So really, how we've been looking at this for the last couple of years is, what is our success in moving through the roadmap, successfully implementing and operationalizing these platforms, programs, and then how are we doing with adoption with customers and employees? So essentially the change management side and the value proposition that those are delivering. So I wouldn't say that there's one top of house KPI that's driving all of that, but it's pretty easy to see in the fabric of the numbers, because it tells a story.
I think one other question, and this always gets into the how, somebody who hears this and thinks about how we pull this off, how did you organize this, and maybe how were the changes in organization? Because a lot of times organizations will look at this and say, this is an IT project, it sits underneath the CIO or the CTO, and we have a PMO practice that does it, or some established way of doing it. But something that's so great in scope and having such an impact on the business like this, was that how you did it? Was there another process or another organization you took to kind of see this thing through from an accountability and execution standpoint?
Yeah, so Chris had mentioned earlier the two in the box, and that was the sort of a descriptor of how him and I work together from a business tech partnership side. But really, this was more of a program that we ran across the bank, because it touched so many areas and disciplines. And the traditional aspects of running projects and programs within the bank are the apparatuses that we interacted with. So we would work with the PMO as we were taking down individual projects and moving those through and keeping a high level view on the roadmaps. We would work with the stakeholder teams when we were, trying to decide between various service providers or, prioritize functionality or make sure that it met all of our needs. We'd work with, some of our, SME partners on the reg side or compliance side, but we needed to make sure that we had the right requirements to, go to market and do things the proper way. So, we really, Chris and I kind of threaded a lot of that needle with the help of our executive team. And then as that team broadened out as it went along, then we had a whole group of us, including the PMO and others that really drove it through.
And related to that, how was budget managed? Was this a central process, or was it, a collection of individual projects that, kind of had to stand on their own?
It started out, we put together kind of the vision for all of this, and we scoped all of that out. And so there was a central budget for the whole thing that was managed up through our executive team. And as the roadmap, as we implemented things and we were starting to look a little bit further out, then it started to get a bit more like individual projects at that point. So we started out with the big approach of all these things we need to tackle: account opening, integration development, digital experience. And then once we got through that and we started to get into, more nuanced things in the future, it kind of fell into like the normal budget cycle from there.
Got it. Understand. Well, this is a very interesting story because it's atypical. You don't see this normally, and certainly the way that you've approached it at the scale you are seems like it's paid off for you. And it's positioned the bank for the future. If anybody wants to learn more about the bank or your organization or individually, to follow up with you, where can they go to get more information?
Yeah, I mean, you can find us at sandyspringbank.com for our business. And obviously, Chris and I individually, you can find us on LinkedIn.
Yep.
Okay. We'll put links to that in the show notes. Chris and Jeff, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.